Now you may start.
Okay, well, we need to order at 7:19, and we can take a look at the agenda. I'll entertain a motion to either approve it or make some changes. All those in favor? Okay, and then we'll take a look at the minutes, which Simone, for those of you who missed last meeting, Simone was nice enough to be shanghaied into being our secretary. The caveat being that she only had to take cursory minutes, just to hit the highlights and not to quote everybody's every utterance, which is good anyway. So she has prepared the minutes from the last meeting. And in the event that Simone has the good sense to miss a meeting, Diane will fill in for her. Have a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
I'll second it.
All those in favor? Okay. And the other little bit of business was last time we had a discussion because something was left out of the changes that we made to the comp plan for town meeting. And it was not a big substantive deal. It was a matter of language. It was supposed to appear in two places and only appeared in one. We had some doubt as to whether that actually happened or it didn't, and Simone was nice enough to check on that, and no, it was not included in the version that was approved at town meeting. So that's something we have to put on our plate for the next time around and include that language. But it was basically in B3, it was a description. I think it was better than guessing here, if I go back to the notes. It was where we were describing the business districts, and we had changed the language to include the mixed-use districts that we were identifying, and that one section didn't get changed. It talked about the Route 1 corridor just being the commercial spine, and the mixed-use districts didn't get included. So we'll fix that next time. However, it is a good reminder of the fact that when we get down to the wire and it's time to take things to public hearing and then to town meeting, that we all need to be responsible, because I missed it, and obviously everybody else did too. We all need to be responsible for double checking and making sure that what TAD transfers to the official copy is everything that we discussed. And when there's lots of little details, it's easy to miss one, and we missed that one. So that easily fixed, no harm done, but we got it. I've stalled as much as I can. How you doing? No, I can keep going.
Keep going.
Okay.
I don't know why it's not kicking in.
All right. At the last meeting, to make things easier in terms of shuffling paperwork around, and I don't have extra copies for Ray and Dot, simply because you're not going to need them, I summarized R1, R2, R3 for the various places that it was in the comp plan and put it on just a couple of pieces of paper. What I did this week was I went back and really read what it says in the comp plan. And because it shows up in Section B and Section C, it is A, horribly redundant, and B, in some cases, terribly written. So with that in mind, I consolidated all the information again in a slightly different format. Okay, and after everybody has a copy, I'll explain what I did. Because one of our tasks is to review the descriptions, and I hope this will make it easier.
Yep, so, no.
On its way.
Thank you.
Okay, what I did with this, and I'll explain the code first. If it's in regular font, it came from Section B. If it's italicized, it came from Section C. And because of the redundancy and the twists in phrase, very often the same thing was attempted to be said twice, but differently, shall I say, so that maybe you wouldn't notice we were saying the same thing twice. So what I did was and in different order, which was also difficult to follow. So I split the whole thing up as bullet points. So for R1, for example, location is in the first bullet. What's in regular font was what was in section B. What's in italics was section C. The difference is section C tends to go in a little more detail. It doesn't consistently, but it's supposed to. Then the second statement is a general description of why we have that district, then residential uses, then talking about density, and the non-residential uses. So if we look at this for R1, for example, as we go through it, if there's something in there that looks like an A needs to be changed or discarded or rephrased, we can do that as a general statement, and then later, if we're going to put it back in the original format, section B and section C, we can easily split it back up. I have some questions as to whether we need to do that. I just sort of say that whatever it is once and be done with it, but it may be that we need to be consistent with the rest of the plan without rewriting the entire thing. So, have I thoroughly confused anybody yet?
No, but you're getting there.
Okay, well then I'll keep trying. All right. A quick summary of R1. R1 is, and we'll have some maps to back us up shortly, but they're not critical for this discussion. R1 is basically 1 acre zoning. It's intended to be high density neighborhoods, primarily residential, home occupations and businesses are allowed, so that, changes that just a little bit. But it's basically a pure residential neighborhood. If you look at the first bullet, it tells you it's located on the west side of Route 1 between Limerick and Campground Roads, and I changed the phrasing on this because the way they had it originally, you couldn't possibly find the next section, which is New Road and Clearview Estates. And then C map, that refers the people back to the map. The district and again, I reflected what we've already changed. This district, including adjacent mixed-use districts, which would be the Alfred Road District and DP1 for the two different sections, is intended to create the potential development of neighborhoods with pedestrian-oriented configurations and access to local businesses and commercial services. Now, when you look in the original comp plan, that's not a direct quote. But the intent, I didn't change the intent. I just phrased it so it reflected those mixed-use districts that they were next to a little bit. Intent, yes.
Maybe Tad can answer this. Why do we have to repeat everything so often? I mean, when you're looking at the comp plan, you've got the future land use plan summary, proposed growth areas, and then we have proposed growth areas under C. Why do we keep repeating?
That's why I did this.
Why can't we eliminate just
Yeah.
the whole, just do it as one? I don't understand. I get so confused when I read this because it feels like we're just repeating and
Yes.
repeating all
Well,
the time.
that's why I put it all together in one set of bullet points. So we could look at the district and say, we like this, we don't like this, we're going to make a recommendation.
Right.
The format for the original comp plan, and Tad will correct me if I'm wrong, was dictated by the state.
Because it just is very repetitive and very,
Yeah, it is. I don't see the need for it.
I don't
And
know.
it's sometimes hard to find it because you have to go read it.
Right, which
Just like the
section,
land use regulations, it would be much cleaner with all of them. Yeah.
The only,
one description of one area,
Yeah.
and that's it.
the only difference between B and C is B is an extremely general, generic statement, and C goes into more specifics. But I agree with you, I don't see any reason why it can't be all in one section and say, this is R1. Why have to go two places?
Right.
So, Mr. Redway, is there any reason we can't change that?
No, there's no reason you can't change anything in there.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. You just have to follow basic formats.
Well, I guess my question is this splitting this up into section B and section C one of the basic formats that we have no choice about? Or
No.
can we just eliminate section B?
Well,
Or
as
at
long
least-
as everything that is in section is covered, no, you can do,
Okay.
you can format it any way you want to. There's no requirement by the state. I mean, the state has certain, all comp plans must have certain components according to the state. This is just the way this one was set up for some reason.
Okay.
I think simple is better.
Simple's always better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
First of all,
You know.
Kathy, I'm trying to maintain your audience is always a hard time. Like I'm trying to maintain one right now. Which doesn't seem to be working. This may be the wrong fixture that we got from Staples.
I think I have wire cutters in that little tool bag of mine. Would that-
Bingo!
Oh, there you go. Look
That's
at
what
that.
was wrong on the wrong setting.
Okay.
I had it on HDMI and you're on.
There we go.
And Simone will initiate the quilting lesson in 5 minutes. Okay, try not to be distracted by the man in the front of the
Yeah,
room.
that's right. I wish I had a curtain.
It's curtains for you.
So I
Most likely.
I think as we're rewriting it, then I think we ought to just consider
Put all
merging
this-
them and just doing one R1 zone description, one R, unless, I think,
Well, I mean, there are 3 separate headings here. One is a summary, and you get into an executive summary with highlights of previous changes. Now, I don't know whether maybe for some people to research, but there are,
If they want to do
There are
research, they can
reasons
go
for it.
get the old plan and research it.
no, they could, but this is helpful, I guess, in terms of somebody wanted to read it and not have to do all that work.
Well, the one place you asked about previous changes, we keep that without interfering with this.
That's big.
Well, that's not the section that we were talking about. Yeah, I mean, there are some general introductory things would be that we could easily keep without getting in our way, because it doesn't change what we're doing. But if we can either take what's in C and lump it in B, so it's all in B, and eliminate part C, or vice versa. So glad.
Tonight's bad.
Oh, well, all right, as a starting point, even if for some reason we end up having to split it up later, we still need to make some sort of agreement as to what R1 is going to look like. And have our general safety. I'm hoping we don't have to split it up, because that would make it easier and shorter. Okay, anyway, to continue with that, R1 residential uses are allowed at a density of 1 dwelling unit per acre. You can have higher density, up to 2 units per acre for residential projects that preserve open space or participate in the transfer of development rights program and conform to, established design standards as long as groundwater quality is protected or if public community water supply or sewage disposal is utilized. Lot sizes, lot frontages, and setback requirements will be reduced to allow a more compact neighborhood to be developed as long as the neighborhood design standards which the planning board would set and all environmental standards are met. So in a nutshell, is 1 acre zoning, except if conditions allow, you can have a development that has a higher density up to 2 units per acre. Thus, crowding people in a little tighter in that area, which is the purpose of R1 to begin with. It's supposed to be the high density, that's really direct development. Whether that has worked or not is a whole different issue.
just
Not, yep.
just like transfer of development rights, are we really progressing anywhere on that? Have we adopted anything?
We haven't adopted anything, but we have a transfer of development rights program which has been proposed and is on paper for the last 6, 7, 8 years. So if we decide we want to continue, that was in the original comp plan, but nothing was ever done with it. There was a conservation commission which met fleetingly, I don't remember how many years ago, but 6 or 7, and a transfer of development rights program was proposed. However, it has never gone anywhere. If we want to pursue that, we've got something in place we can discuss. And if we don't, then we would have to drop that language.
I know the planning board in the past has not been in favor of GPRs.
Why?
I know I'm not. I know there's been some discussion over the years about that, and I can't exactly remember why.
I don't know if anybody's ever looked. I don't know if anybody has come forward and asked to participate in that kind of program.
Well, it's kind of hard if it doesn't even exist, because it would take so long to.
I mean, we have the authority to implement one, but nobody's come forward and said, I'm looking to do that.
Well, you need two willing partners.
Right. That's exactly right.
And if, I'm gonna assume that in recent years, because the amount of development has slacked off because of the economy, there's not a lot of developers out there who are looking to do the 2 units per acre. In the event that the economy ever improves, maybe.
Well, I mean, even when housing was going gangbusters in 2006, 7, though, I mean, I don't know if anybody came to the planning board, board of selectmen and say, hey, we're looking to create some development rights here, let's do something. That's not to say we shouldn't do it, I'm just saying, there's not a pressing need, I don't think, out there for.
Well, I agree with you.
But I mean, I know the document's been written, I've been to some of the meetings about it, but has it actually been passed by the town?
Well, no, it would probably have to come through us first to make it mesh with this and then go to the planning board.
Right, well, it would be hard for, what I was trying to say is it'd be hard for anybody who wanted to do it because even though it's on paper, it doesn't even really exist. In this town, it would take, you know, kind of like forever. If you wanted to do it today, you'd have to invest time and energy to get past that process of through the committees and
Yeah.
through the town meeting and stuff like that. You don't want, a lot of these developers don't want to wait that long. If it was in place and it's on paper and it's part of what we have in town, then if somebody wanted to, then it's just simply saying that they need to have the two willing parties. So I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to have it in place, but just having it on paper doesn't really do us a whole lot of good.
Well, not as a proposal, though, because it's not a legal thing for us to do because it hasn't been approved. But I mean,
And this plan doesn't do that anyway.
Right.
All it does is encourage that as part of the
Exactly.
vision. I mean, you gotta go through a whole bunch of steps to get that.
It's an extremely complex document you
Yeah.
have to put together. It's a system that you have to put together, and usually it involves a density bonus. Problem is, we don't have capacity to give a density bonus because we don't have terrific soils. Actually, our best soils are out in the area you're trying to protect, number one. That's the best places where we have Adams soils, which would be able to take a much higher density load. It's much easier to do when you have sewer, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Where you can provide a density bonus that would make somebody want to buy the TDR credits and move the development over there. Otherwise, there's no reason to, because in our world here, you do your development based on location. Oh, what a beautiful lot out in the R4 district on Thompson Road I have. But I can get double the units if I'm over on Route 1 or in the R2 district over on Old Post Road. But I can sell these lots on Thompson Road much easier, and this is what my clients want. I mean, that's what you're battling. You're battling desirability of land, and you have to be able to provide a density bonus in a desirable enough area for that person to want to be able to make the transfer and get the density bonus.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the planning board struggled with that, where it was more like spot zoning.
Well,
There were some discussions on that on a couple of occasions, because you brought it up years ago, I think when you first came on board, and it was brought up even before that, and maybe the planning board wasn't educated enough, because I know that I was against it, but I can't remember exactly why. But, you know, maybe the planning board wasn't educated enough on exactly what it was, but I know there was some pushback from the planning board. It'd have to come out of the land, it'd have to be built into the land use ordinance, if I remember right.
Yeah, but there also has to be a TDR system that you put in place that's sort of like a bank. It's sort of like a
Yeah.
wetlands banking system, and you're doing it with density. And so you're granting densities in one place in order to have that person take that land and put it in a conservation easement, and as a reward for that, they get to transfer their density and get a density bonus to go somewhere else. That's what the intent is.
Yeah.
And that requires a system, because we've got to have fairness and equitability in it. And that's where the Mount Carmel decision back in the 80s was a problem where there wasn't equitability in Mount Carmel, New Jersey, their system, that got challenged in court. So you have to have an equitable system so that everybody gets treated the same. Otherwise, then it's not so much spot zoning as it is favoritism. It's crony zoning, if you will. So
Well-
you've got to be very careful to make sure it's equitable for all people.
My recollection of the proposal that was on the table, and I haven't looked at it in a long time, so I may be wrong on a lot of details, but one of the things that I'm certain of was that whatever arrangement was made had nothing to do with the town. It was between in effect, buyer and the seller.
Right.
So if Simone had the land and was willing to transfer those development rights to me as the developer, she and I worked out the details.
Right.
And as long as it fell within the parameters of the proposal that the town approved, in terms of numbers of acres and whatever limitations there were, whatever money was exchanged or whatever mortgage agreements were made or what have you, that was entirely a private deal. So it eliminates the town being involved in any way and saying, well, oh, let's see, you want to transfer development rights, well, we like John, so we'll send you his way, and,
Well, that's not entirely true. The town is involved because what the town does is it changes its density characteristics in order to accept those development rights into this area. So the town is a part of it. They don't negotiate
but that's
the
my
deal.
point, right, the town,
But they
the town
accept the
has no input or control over the partners involved in the transfer. They certainly have everything to say about the parameters in terms of where the acreage can come from and where it can go to.
Right.
So, luck of the draw, if Simone happens to have acreage in the right place, then she can participate. If John lives next to her and for some reason he's in the wrong place, then he just can't participate. He's not on the approved list, so to speak. So yes, the town sets up those parameters, but the negotiation is between the buyer and the seller of those rights.
That's right.
So, maybe we could avoid some of those pitfalls with some intelligent planning ahead of time. But I think for our purposes, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, all we need to give thought to is, are we going to continue to have that language in the comp plan as a potential carrot? And then it's, if the planning board follows through with that and accepts such a plan, that's great. If they never do, then we have the same thing we've had for the last 20 years. We have language in the comp plan that doesn't mean anything. So.
Doesn't mean anything, but it's an option.
Right. Well, it's not an
You
option
don't have to
until somebody does something
Right,
about it.
Yeah.
but that's what I said, nobody's
Until
come
six.
forward yet until somebody does. If it's not in the comp plan, then we're back here to amend the comp plan, and that's another step in the
Yeah.
process.
But I guess my point is, if we're going through this exercise at this point, and that seems like a good idea potentially still, then why don't we take it the next step and see if we can get a program that might actually work for the town? So if somebody does come forward in 5 years, we can say, yes, we happen to have, everything's all set. All you need to do is find your acreage.
But that's not within the parameters of this document.
Not within the document.
You might go outside as a special project for this committee, that's fine, but it's not something we need to do.
No, it's not something we're going to do as part of the comp.
No, not putting that, not the specific language in the comp plan, but I guess my point is, why have that in the comp plan at all if we're never, ever going to take a look at this?
So then it's an option.
If we're going to look at it, let's look at it.
Well, we could, we certainly look at it, but when we do that, who knows, but if it's not there.
Yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're saying.
I guess I want to say no harm, no foul, but
Yeah.
at this
It
point.
also could be put in our implementation schedule. We could backlog it in the implementation and put it in a category where it's a long-range plan that could come forward on an as-need basis to the front. And that way it could still stay in there. I would agree. I don't, as much as I'm not a big fan of TDR, I think it's always smart for a town to have the option to be able to implement it in case something dramatic happens.
It's not in the implementation plan now. I've looked for it in the implementation plan.
I think it is. It's not a big deal, but I believe it's mentioned.
I know I read it somewhere
It's
in here, but I
implementation.
couldn't find it. But doesn't mean it's not there. I'm looking at it correct, so.
Well, Todd's looking at that, I want to go back to this first bullet point on R1. And looking at comp plan map 2014. Reading it, west side of Route 1 between Limerick and Campground Roads, and also encompasses New Road and Clearview Estates neighborhoods. However, on the map, it looks like it goes Limerick Road the whole length to the turnpike.
Well, that's one of us, I didn't write this description. Yeah, again, that's one of the things we
But
need to
just
look at. Can
Me
we,
reading that description, it just seems like it's just that area, you know, just immediately Campground, Limerick Road, and it says between Limerick Road and Campground Road, since where those two meet, that's where I'm kind of,
well, there are two distinct sections of our law
Yeah.
that are not connected.
right,
Yeah,
Right.
but this doesn't describe either one.
I agree.
But we're not looking to describe districts at this point. We just say, this is the general location where these districts ought to be located by the next body, the planning board, to actually define what the district is. So if we want to say it's just Clearview, I mean, that's enough to say the Clearview State area.
Yeah, that new road Clearview Estates
Right.
kind of takes the northern part and describes it. It's the southern part that's real vague.
kind of like from the Campground Road to Turnpike.
5.3?
It can be vague, that's all I'm saying. I mean, leave it to the planning board to put the, you know,
Fine.
I don't know what using the word is located. I mean, most of these plans indicate where it should be located.
Yep, there it is. 3 to 5 years out.
Yeah, that was back.
And just double checking,
About
sure, I didn't
7.
change it.
No, you didn't change it, this is it.
It is,
Yeah.
yeah.
You just get back to the nature of what this document is.
Yeah.
We're just raising encouragement, this is what things ought to be, but say this going to be here isn't necessarily what you started doing.
The recommended location.
Right.
But since it's been there for the last 20 years, it is. We're not likely,
There you go.
we're not likely to move it.
Yeah, turning your R1 into an R4 would probably cause a little bit of trouble with that.
All right, do we want to continue
Yes.
anything? Okay, yes, okay, good. Thanks.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. Good vote. Are we all set with the higher density as possible bullet and everything it says in there? And, you know, we will no doubt go back and visit this again to clean up all the language and make it into real paragraphs, but just for content.
I have a question on the second bullet. The district is intended to accommodate good quality, high-density neighborhoods. Is there bad quality?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
But just the wording of it just doesn't seem,
Well,
So
remember,
trailer park overlay, we could say is bad quality.
this was written to describe the town and its future and also impress. So, you know, I would have no problem eliminating good quality to accommodate high-density neighborhoods.
well, I would have
But, I
put,
mean,
the
that's-
district is intended to accommodate quality,
Quality.
high-density neighborhoods and just it's good on it.
Well, we can mull that over. Put a question mark by the word good.
It's like that on both of them too.
Diana's feeling mediocre.
And R3.
Yeah, it shows up in all three. It was very consistent language, which is why I think it was there for the purposes of impressing the reader. Okay, non-residential uses are limited to community and government uses, non-motorized recreational facilities, and home occupations, businesses. And I did change that, because a while back in the comp plan, in some places it was called home occupations, in other places it was home businesses. And since we could never resolve which word we wanted to use, we decided to use them both consistently, so there you go. Uses that generate significant traffic noise or similar impacts will be excluded. Small-scale agricultural and natural resource uses will be allowed. New agricultural uses will be subject to reasonable standards, again by the planning board, to protect adjacent residential areas. Allowed residential uses will include single and two-family homes, as well as multifamily dwellings. Housing for the elderly and elder care facilities will be allowed. And I did a little bit of wordsmithing there just to make it English, but didn't change any of the concepts. So, are there any non-residential uses there that we should recommend go away or be added?
Well, I have a question about reasonable standards. What is the, how do you define reasonable standards?
We don't, the planning board does.
They do. Okay.
What's the goal? Preservation of residential character in that neighborhood? I mean,
Make it-
reasonable standards should say what they're trying to achieve.
I know how I would define it. Basically, nothing that the neighbors are gonna complain about, apart from the fact that, you know, I can't stand my neighbor because he's tall.
The old good neighbor standards.
Basically, yes,
Yeah,
thank you.
it used to be in the old land use book,
Yeah,
good neighbor standards.
Yeah.
They work pretty well. Which is why they're not there.
I still have a copy of that if you wanna go there.
Oh, I read it. Believe it or not, I read the standards.
I'm sure you did. But yeah, again, the planning board, I mean, do we want to expand on that?
We're talking
That-
about new agricultural uses, being
Yeah.
subject to regional standards for the purpose of protecting adjacent residents. That's the goal.
Okay.
And uses that generate significant traffic, noise, or similar impacts will be excluded. So you couldn't have a, you know, dog kennel right next door in a small 1 acre lot zone.
So you're saying it limits the agricultural uses by that language?
It's limited to small-scale new agricultural uses, with the goal to protect the surrounding residential properties and whatever that
And
agriculture
I
may
think
be.
rightfully so, in this
Absolutely.
particular area.
Yeah, my zone.
I mean, I don't worry about agricultural being in there at all for this area.
Well, agricultural is very broad. If we take that out, then people are gonna say they can't have a backyard garden.
No.
No.
Well, no.
That's what I said before.
Yeah,
Really?
It's
then they don't
cultivation of soil.
Wow.
That's agriculture.
What?
Cultivation of soil is agriculture
Right.
in our definitions, our zoning definitions.
So is there enough language in there to limit, you know, the agricultural? That would be, then that would be the purpose here, right?
Well, one of the things, wasn't that the last one?
No.
One of the things, and that's why this came out, is that even within some of these residential areas, there are still some people who have a significant parcel of land. So, you know, one of the things we discussed is, you know, should they be held so that they can't use their land, and that the only thing they can do is build houses on it. You know, if you have a 100-acre lot, and you have housing developments all around you, does that mean that that's all you can do is just build houses on it? And that's one of the things that we discussed at the last meeting.
And we
Have
will
these
go-
people
we
come
will go back to
forward?
that.
Have they requested this, you know, this residential district acreage analysis? Have people come forward inquiring about it, or are we
Yes.
just talking about it? I mean,
No,
how
they-
many people?
There are a number of people in town who have significant acreage within these zones.
Have expressed an interest? or
Yes,
want their
and
land
are hogtied because they can't. And, well, see, the other piece of this,
Who are these people, and how come we don't know that? I mean, why don't we, I mean, I don't know
well,
them.
next time I speak to the people I've been speaking to, I'll give you your number.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, seriously,
Yeah.
I don't,
Well-
I would like to be knowledgeable about the concerns here, and I don't know, you know, we're opening another whole ball of wax, and I don't, you know, I mean, I don't know, I've never been to it, like, it didn't come up in town meeting, I don't know where it came
Well,
up.
see, it's not likely to, because these are individuals who, you know, they end up going to town hall saying, look, I've got it, I want to do this, but I can't because. I'll give you one example that's been resolved, that was Pam Drew with her llamas. She's in, I'm not sure whether she's in R1 or R2.
She's in R1, she has a
R1.
5-acre lot.
No, she has a
She's
10
an
acre
R1,
lot.
she's a 5 acre.
She has a 10 acre lot. But anyway, she wanted to do some things with her llamas and farm retail, but she was in R1, but she's got 10 acres, it's not gonna impact her neighbors at all. Why can't she do that? You know, there are some other folks in town who have larger parcels who want to do more animal husbandry than the 5 animal units allowed. You know, 5 animal units is a lot if you're talking about chickens. because an animal unit is 1,000 pounds. But if you're doing cows, it's not a lot. But if you have 50 acres, you can certainly handle more than 5 cows without interfering with anybody else in the neighborhood. So that was part of the impetus for this discussion. Now, the other thing is, and that was what got me looking at the pieces. The other problem, and the thing that has always bothered me, is the nature of the boundary lines. It basically doesn't matter whose land you cut in half, that is the boundary line between R1 and R4. So how many of the parcels, and that's part of what's summarized on that sheet, cross lines? Well, if you're in R1 and R4, which zone limits you where? And maybe we want to take a look at that and recommend to the planning board that when they draw the lines, they follow lot lines, not just this straight line, arbitrary straight line. And a lot of these, they are truly arbitrary. You know, they were drawn for convenience. You know, here we are, that looks like a good square to make. So
Is this something we do just as the town alone, or do other towns, you know, do the same kind of arbitrary lines? I don't know. I mean, I don't know, what is the,
It's all over
what
the
is
lot.
the,
It's all over the lot. Some towns try to follow boundary lines, some towns, some planners like straight lines.
Yeah.
so we have.
The straight lines are easy to describe, the boundary lines are very, very
And can
wordy.
change.
And, well, yeah, I mean, but that wouldn't,
But it
The
makes
map would.
it makes it very difficult for the person who owns that lot. Because now you've got a lot that falls into 2 different zones.
or a lot.
We got a neighbor that has 3 different towns in his lot.
Mhm.
He's actually in 3 different towns. So that's problematic.
Yeah. I
But,
don't think we can fix that.
oh,
Not
we had somebody that had
Next.
3 different zones.
So
We've
she
got
said
somebody who's in
town.
4 zones.
Yeah.
I know,
Yeah.
We've got one lot in town that's in 4 different zones.
yeah, I know there was
We do.
one on the old Alfred Road that was in 3, right, Tad?
Yep, yep, we put them all in one.
Yeah.
that makes sense.
And in part, this also goes back to part of our discussion from the last go-around, which is, all right, if you're a property owner, can we as much as possible get the town out of your way so you can do what you would like to with your property? Again, good neighbor policy without impacting your neighbors negatively.
Right, that-
Yeah,
that's
you're
the
gonna
fine
fi-
line right there.
that's the
is
fine
making- You know, I'm okay with, you know, adding some stuff, but again, you know, it's gonna become more traffic because somebody is selling more stuff on my street, or, you know what? There's a reason why I moved in the R1 zone, because,
Well, what if you have more traffic because the guy with 50 acres puts in 50 houses?
when I,
It's different than a tractor and the smell of manure and, you know, that's
Oh,
a
I'll take
whole
the tractor
nother.
and the smell of it
Well-
any day.
Well, you would, but people in R1 who bought for that reason probably would not. So that's what I'm trying to say here, is that we gotta be careful with that.
Yes, and that's part of, the same thing we did last time with the business districts, where we said, okay, we have, or mixed-use districts, I have to break that habit for myself. We have folks who have potential here, they have these lots, and then we said, well, but what do they think? So we invited them in and we heard what they thought, and as a result of that discussion, we made some changes in some of our proposals to the town meeting and then ultimately the planning board. My expectation is that we would do the same thing here. You know, once we identify the problem areas in each little section, invite those landowners in and say, okay, what do you think? You know, if you're a split lot between R1 and R4, what I'd love to do is say to the landowner, which one do you want to be in? And put them there, because that's their desire. Do they want to develop their land and make the most of it in terms of houses per acre? Stay at R1. Would you like the opportunity to do other things with it and keep it open? They might opt for R4. So let the landowners solve those individual problems as opposed to us sitting here and trying to read somebody's mind.
I agree with you, but then you also have to think about their neighbors
Well-
and their landowners too.
And they
So that's
would be
gonna,
invited as well.
yeah.
we're gonna-
So, but
look at
what
neighborhoods
precedents would we take though? Would we take, I mean, it'd be kind of tough, you know? You're saying that, you know, we're gonna allow more farming or whatnot, and I live right next to you. Well, I might be on that piece of land that's, you know, 500 yards from you, and that would be problematic to me if I didn't like that. I'm not saying I don't like that, I'm saying it
No,
would be
I-
problematic.
Understand.
And so now who do we go with here when we define this? Do we go with the landowner who actually owns the land, or do we now have to take into consideration the person who's adjacent to them who also owns land? And that gets tough.
Yeah, it does. But I think at this stage of the game, I'd rather not solve the problems until we know what they're going to be. But, we're all thinking along the same lines. Let's not step on anybody's toes if we can avoid it. And if it comes down to a choice, we're not going to make the decision. The town will make the decision at town meeting.
You're just opening it up.
What do we have? What I know now, and I'm very confident about, is that our current zoning arrangement, both in terms of some of the lines and where some of the properties fall, was random in its inception, and it is currently unfair to a good number of landowners. If we can fix some of that, I think we owe it to the townspeople to give it a shot.
Where do you think the unfair to a good number of landowners exists? Where is that geographical location? That area where landowners are being burdened by the current zoning lines?
Well, I think it's, primarily the edges. Where one district butts up against another that is particularly that's significantly different. And, where you have, the straight line.
Whereabouts would you think?
Well, the R1, R4.
Well, that's a property line. That's the property line of basically Clearview Acres. This is the open space of it, so that's why that's there. But would it be like down?
And, the other place is along Limerick Road primarily.
Okay, so this area where it's this far from the river, that's the issue. Is that correct?
R1, R4, where it's split between
Yeah,
Right in
Limerick
here?
Road and then the river.
Yeah.
In some cases,
Right in this
because
area?
of the split lot situation, and in other cases, because you have a large lot sandwiched in between some smaller ones, so the large lot just became R1 because it was stuck in the middle.
So like here, we have R1 right in here, and then back here, we have a small lot, small lot, small lot, small lot. And we have an R1, and then halfway through it, it turns into R4. Is that correct? Would that be an example of that?
Well, that's a split lot situation, yes. Yeah. Now, again, if we get those people in and they say, it's not a problem for me, well, if it's not a problem for them, it's not a problem for me either. But I would like to look at it.
You know what I also like, just so that we can get a perspective from your table, Don, is we ought to go back that way with it. Okay, so, you said all these, 10 to 19 acres, we've got this amount, and we're, these other people, but there are probably hundreds of people that have a lot less than that. And to me, try to make changes for one or two people versus the masses, I have a little bit of a hard time with that, but I'd like to see that.
Well,
See
between
what that number
what
is.
Tad and John Bell did, we can see that.
We can see some of that.
Yeah.
Actually, first of all, I did a map. I did the reverse of John's, because John's map was like a Mondrian. It's just so fields of red, fields of yellow. I'm going like, it's all red and yellow. And I did the same thing. I took your color scheme and applied it to the whole town. And if this swing thing will start, oh my God, I love technology. Come on.
Turn the power on, your computer went off.
Yeah, I know. It's not starting. It's gonna. Come on. Oh, it's dead. Huh. Oh, the power cord came out. It was dead before you. Okay. Well, let's keep talking. My turn. Okay. This is why we have paper backup. Tape, please. Although the development we've been having over the years, over the last 10 years, has been primarily, has been significant for the town, and has involved a number of lots that required, quite a few lots that required us to put in a growth ordinance in order to control the number of units that were given permits on an annual basis. The simple fact is, we have a lot of land in this town that is in excess of 10 acres. And it's one thing to see it on the chart there, it's another thing to see it on the town-wide basis. Now, yes, we can take out the BI district, and we can take out portions in here that are part of the business district there, but the majority of this otherwise, except for this block in here, is pretty much in the residential districts. And you can see, the reds are 50-acre parcels.
Mostly R4 stuff.
Yes and no. We've still got some back in here in the R1 district. We've got some in the R2 district. We've got some in the BI district. We've got swaths of it. A lot of it, you're right, is in the R4 district. But there's also a good amount of parcels that are 30 and 40 that are just scattered like pickup sticks throughout town.
And that table that you're looking at, Dan, that I gave out last meeting, that's only R1, R2, R3. R4 is not on there.
Yeah, R4 is
So
not on there.
that 100+ lots doesn't include anything in R4.
Yeah.
But when you look at that Limerick Road section,
Yep.
that's got quite a few of them. And a lot of
Well,
us-
in the back area, but if you look at, we look at the reverse, and I did it, John's map in reverse, where I showed the lots under 10 acres.
Right, it's all stuff that's out behind on the Limerick Road.
Limerick Road gets very dense down in here. We get a lot of density along Old Post Road, obviously New Road, obviously the Clearview Acres area, but I mean, that gives you an idea of, this is where we're seeing a lot of the development. And certainly the lots that are in orange and red, those are all house lots. Because the reds are less than an acre. So those would be the cluster lots. And substandard lots. The oranges would be our standard 1+ acre lots, and you're going to see concentrations of them in the R1's district, but not by themselves. We have a number of them along the Old Post, and they're not necessarily a cluster. That's a cluster, but these aren't. So those are non-conforming lots from a different time. Actually, probably prior to our R2, or our 2-acre zoning that was kind of universal throughout the whole town. So those probably predate those. And the orange, the green ones are 2-acre lots, 2 to 3 acre lots. And you can see they start, there's no real pattern. Okay, there's more of a pattern of those along Mountain Road, for instance. But in general, they're along the roads, as we would expect them to be. They're going to be along the roads, using the roads as frontages, or with small subdivisions that come off of there.
Now, where's your Bartlett Farms falling?
Bartlett Farms
Right
is
with the red mark in it.
right here.
Yeah.
See that right there?
Okay,
And we show those as, those are lots that exist. They are recorded. So
but they're small.
they're very small.
Mhm.
They're very, very small.
1 acre or less.
Yeah, they're 1 acre or less. Yeah. There's several that were bigger just because of configuration purposes.
So what's that big one? Is that the Thompson Road one up there that's all?
This up here? Yeah. That's, that would be Trout Brook Road and Thompson Road up through here. All the way, pretty much.
Yeah, probably part of that probably doesn't record my joining my two pieces, because that kicks me out of the small one back into the big
It
one.
might. This is the 2012 parcel database. 2014 will be coming in a couple of weeks. This will be useless. Well, it won't be useless. It'll be changed in moderate ways.
But it does show us that, and one of the things that I ask everybody to remember too is that when we did some of this zoning, there was a big push by the state to assign these areas. And that some of these people who have these big lots have owned these big lots for a long time. And they were there long before we decided to make it residential. And so what we did in the end is, for some of these, we impacted them. They might not have realized it when the comp plan passed, and then by the time you realize that it's too late to do anything about it. But some of these people were impacted by the change as well, like the llama farm. They probably didn't realize as much when the comp plan was passing until they tried to do something, and then they found out that they had to go through hoops and loops to do something. And I don't think that's much of an impact. I don't think it's much of an impact to their neighbors. And it's kind of the for me, living in a rural town, that's kind of the stuff you want to see. You know, the blueberry farm, you know, things like that. You want to see nice, clean, little businesses growing in your town. But in some of these areas, they can't have it. Even if you have 50 acres, you can't have it. Which just doesn't make sense.
Well, I'm certainly a proponent of agriculture, I do it myself, so, you know, it's not that. I'm just very concerned about once you define something and the other people who are affected by it. And yes, the llamas are very nice, but chicken poop all over and noise is not nice when it's right next to you.
It's finding a checks
You know,
and
or-
balance.
Pig farm or
Oh, yeah.
whatever.
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean,
we
you know, at
discussed
least you're
the pig
opening
farms.
yourself up to all of
Yeah.
that, you know, unless you define it, you know. And you said, I understand we don't define it, I know that, but at the same time, you have to be really careful with that if you know, for the other.
Yeah, and I don't think there was, I think the pig farm thing came up last.
Well, yeah, I think there are
And
two.
it's, I've seen it, I mean, I can do it on my land if I want to, I don't think my neighbors would like it. But it could.
But again, I think part of it was making sure that it got defined in the land use ordinance as far as buffering. So if you owned a 50-acre lot, you could not put that barn
Well,
or
that's
whatever
okay. Yeah.
right on the edge of your property. If you were going to do something like that, then you had to locate it so that it wouldn't affect the immediate neighbors. And I think that's something that, you know, has to be, you know, stressed
Right.
with the planning board, is that, you know, yes, you're allowed to do it, but with certain conditions, you know.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
think
I'm all
those
for it.
conditions create a whole lot of, look at the issues that we ran into with the Du Bois farm.
There's
Right.
another one. Yeah.
It's a farm. Well, sorry, you don't like the smell of the farm. You know, so, I mean, you know.
Yeah, but you
again,
know something, for years after I went to those meetings, you didn't smell anything over there. And now there's an issue, in the last 2 weeks, I can't walk outside my house.
You can't.
That's what
It's
happens,
Farming
right?
practices.
Well, that was part of what we discussed last time. Tom and I had a nice little discussion about pigs. And it does boil down to farming practices.
Yeah.
You know, if you can raise X number of animals, it doesn't matter what species, and create a tremendous problem for your neighbors and yourself. You know, while you're at it, you contaminate your own well. And that has nothing to do with the comp plan and land use ordinance, it has to do with the people who are doing the farming. You could raise the same number of animals of the same species on the same plot of land and not have anybody know they were there.
Well, I agree with that, 'cause when I go to the dump, I'm amazed that a certain person has the manure pile in the front yard instead of behind the barn. You know, it's right by the edge of the road. And what, you know, most farmers would put it away, yeah, out back and
I thought he
stuff.
was selling it by the $5
Well,
bucket.
He
Is that what
might
you're doing?
be, but.
I mean, that's kind of what
Oh,
I
yeah,
thought, but
I
I
think he
haven't
But
read
you
it.
don't have to advertise it that
Yeah,
way,
but
you
I
know.
guess-
Signage
but see,
on it.
to facilitate picking it up, you put it in the front probably. And these are the kinds of things.
And
Well,
yet that's the R1 acre, isn't he in the R1 zone?
He's in the R2.
R2,
R2.
you know, so.
That's what I'm saying.
But at that point, then you could sit there and say, well, according to our zoning standards, this isn't a good place for you to be putting this, therefore, you know, you need to meet these conditions and put the stack someplace else, you know, and.
All right. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment. Assuming, is that manure pile a problem for anybody except visually?
It does have an odor, and some days you go by
If you
there.
drive by fast enough, you really don't smell it.
Now, I'm not suggesting that really is the
That's
best
which
place.
way the wind is blowing for the
But see,
neighbors.
that's where you can get into the endless discussion.
It's
No,
being remedied, that is being remedied right now.
Okay, but if any one of us, if not today where we live, but maybe some other time, we live someplace else, we can think of a neighbor who absolutely drove us nuts. If we had an ordinance for every little thing, I'll give you my example, when we lived in New Jersey, we had a neighbor who had a backyard, if you finish out the square of these tables, that was his lawn. Every Saturday morning, 7 o'clock, he mowed that lawn for 2 hours. I don't know why. He must have gone back and forth and back and forth. drove John and I crazy. But, you know, you wanna write an ordinance against mowing your lawn at 7 o'clock in the morning for 2 hours when you basically don't have a lawn? We just said, well, all right, so he's inconsiderate. So what? You can't control every little bit of that. You can't control how your neighbors live. But if we have appropriate language here and the planning board does appropriate, reasonable standards, you can keep a lid on it. And then after that, it's, you know, maybe sometimes you just need to go to your neighbor and say, could you please not do that? And maybe that'll rectify it. Or maybe you'll be shot. But either way.
Yeah.
It is in New Jersey.
But I mean, something like this, gentlemen, I mean, you're talking water quality, if the neighbors are nearby. So there's a lot of other issues that, you know.
No, I agree. I agree. That, you know, that's something that probably should be addressed. And assuming that it's going to be, problem solved.
But that neighbor will make the argument, which is, I mean, I'm not in favor, but that neighbor will make the argument that Diane brought up earlier. You know, it's his land and it's his way of trying to make a living and.
Right, but
Keep the
again,
effluent on your property and out of the water, out
Right.
of the aquifer supply, and we won't have a problem.
Right.
I'm just stating that.
Yeah,
you know,
but at
do
the
that.
but
Why
at
not
the
on
same
the
time,
tax
we're
line?
telling
Put it on by
businesses
putting up the
how to
tax.
buffer their business and how to do certain things. So there's no reason why we can't be doing it in residential areas.
I agree on
That if
that.
we're telling the businesses how to buffer and how to, you know, visually impact that the same thing can't be. We tell people they're supposed to meet certain setbacks and they can only cut so much in front of their lots or
And what
whatever
size
to
sign
do,
is supposed to have.
you know. So, I mean, you know.
And the agricultural piece, whether it's cropland or animal husbandry, is fundamentally a business if you're doing it on that scale.
Right.
So it should certainly have some rules and regulations so as not to impact the neighbor. Whether the neighbor next door owns an acre or the neighbor owns 50 acres, it still shouldn't be impacting the neighbor.
So, to reiterate things here then, in my mind, you're saying we're gonna open that up to these people because they've been limited. And then we're gonna let the planning board worry about how they're going to supervise it, or the ordinances themselves are gonna supervise it. So is that what you're saying here?
I'm not sure we've gotten even that far yet. I think what we were doing is having a discussion about can you, how do we go about doing that?
But should we get to that point, you are right, it is the planning board's job,
That's what I'm,
with our guidance and encouragement, to put the pieces in place so that neighbors are not inconvenienced and driven out of their minds.
okay.
That's done by designating those uses as conditional uses.
Correct.
Conditional.
Correct, well,
Should that be
and with
stated?
conditions, yeah,
Yeah.
you should be
Yeah.
Rather
Look.
than reasonable standards or something.
reasonable standards is too thin.
No,
That's why I asked that question, I consider
Yeah.
that too thin. Because frankly speaking, we're bringing up some issues that the planning board's going to not have enough direction on. I don't think you have to say that there are, agriculture usually isn't a problem except for manure spreading in the spring. We don't do septic spreading anymore because the state doesn't really allow it anymore. So really, that's about the only real impact from that standpoint. What we're really talking about here, I think, is animal husbandry.
Yeah.
And there are species that are less impact than other species. And you might want to say that the type of species might be relative to the area and the location, the area of the lot, the amount of lot, and the location of the lot. Because I don't care if you got a 20-acre farm, if you got a pig farm, you're going to smell it beyond your 20-acre farm. That's just the way it is.
But I think that's something the planning board has to put in there.
And they do, but I think what the comp plan committee can do is they can say that they should consider the impact of various species.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's part of the conditioning.
As part of the conditional use. That might be one way that, because we're gonna, just like we've gotten pushback from the residential people in the business zones, if you remember when we did the DB1 and the DB2, we got a lot more pushback at the planning board level than we expected from the DB2 people. I think we're gonna get a lot of pushback from the R1 people when the time comes. And I think we want to be prepared to say, have a better plan than, no, if you have enough acreage, that it doesn't matter what you do. I think we need to be a little more specific because small lots in concentration, as we see there, can be impacted by an inappropriate use. And remember, agriculture is not heavily regulated in this town, or by any planning board, and there is a right to farm law in the state too, that we have to be careful of. Because it does in fact give farmers the right to do typical practices, standard practices, even best management practices in farming. And there are impacts from that, and the DEP, the state of, and actually the Department of Agriculture recognizes that. But they see it as not being long lasting, as long as they're temporary or ephemeral kind of things, spreading manure, okay, you know, it's gonna dissipate. After a good rain or a couple of days, it's gonna dissipate.
You know, my lot and my two brother-in-laws lot is a perfect example. You know, behind us there's absolutely nothing, but in front there's a road right there, and, you know, they're all 1 acre lots.
You're right, this is you, isn't it? Right in there, is that you?
No,
No,
next
you're
one
farther
down.
up.
No, next one down,
That right there?
the yellow,
Oh,
right there. That's me.
that's you,
And then
right.
the other two below that is my two brother-in-laws.
Okay.
Right, so we all go on to Liberty Acres. So, I mean, we all have 10 acres of land, you can do, you know, a bunch of animal husband, but if that's gonna increase some smell, that's gonna increase traffic on that road, that's a perfect example of where you'd have residences that are gonna say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? This is supposed to be a residential area.
You got farm machinery coming through for haying or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it's all woods, I mean, but it could be fields, you know, I mean, our lots could be fields, and, you know, you just, to me, you gotta be really, really respectful of the local neighbors.
Well, I think that's where we're going to eventually get down to the nitty-gritty of this. When I first started going through the maps, I picked 10 acres as a starting point, as a purely arbitrary number. We might look at this and say that the lower threshold is 20 acres before we even start considering any other options. The other thing is, something you just pointed out, what are the current conditions? You know, if we're looking at a 20-acre woodlot, odds are the owner isn't going to want to go through and take down all those trees and pull all those stumps and start doing cows. It's just not going to happen. So that's an unrealistic thing, but certainly should, when you're automatically has an option to, you know, take the timber off the lot. So yes, there would be temporary traffic from that, but that's already allowed. So I think a lot of the things that we might say, well, wow, this could get really big and out of hand. When we start looking at what's actually there in terms of, is it wooded, is it swamp, what are the soils like, we might find that there's a handful of properties in town that are, this is just my way of thinking, unfairly limited, and maybe we can find a way to free that up for them. What you're describing there, I wouldn't suggest we take those 10 acres and, you know, turn them into chicken farms. It makes no sense. You're in the middle of a residential neighborhood.
Right, but you know, we've gotta give some teeth for the planning board to grab onto, right?
Yes.
And be able to put those conditions in there.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
It just can't be arbitrary.
Yeah.
You know.
No, and I think traffic has to be,
One
You
of
know,
the
if you're-
conditions to look at.
right, I mean, if,
It's typically
And-
one.
Right.
But again,
right,
already
and I think that there's a very big difference
Yeah.
between doing something out on the Limerick Road area where they go towards the river, or looking at a 10-acre lot in the middle of a huge subdivision. Okay, I think they're,
But again, couldn't your planning board set the standards depending on if you, how much, if your access to, if your lot frontage or whatever is on a primary road, like say the Limerick Road, like with the alpaca farm, as opposed to your access is in a small residential, you know, area and stuff, and not an arterial road or something. So there's a difference that you could set the impact as far as the
couldn't they do that,
standards.
Dan? When you're considering something like that, couldn't the planning board use
The
the,
roads.
the,
Yeah, I
The
just,
access
you know, we
roads.
keep talking about, or the planning board has said, you know, that we write in the land use ordinance, they want, you know, John used to make a comment, I wanted 10 pages or less, you know, and all of these things that we're talking about are great, but they just add and add and add and make that document that's gonna be this thick, you know, but It has to be, it has to be.
That's right.
It's just, it's more, there are certain people that no matter what you do, like to pick the documents apart, and the more words you put in there, the more they'll pick apart, and it's just a never-ending process. It drives you nuts, but I guess that's life.
But I think
Yeah.
putting a subdivision access versus, what would you call that, Limerick Road, an arterial road?
Arterial and collector roads, yeah. We may be overthinking this at this stage. Again, if we crunch the data and look at what's really out there, I mean, that's part of my frustration. What's really out there? Because when I took the map that was like that, and I used little Post-it notes, and I have these little colored Post-it notes all over, but I have, for the most part, no idea what that acreage is like. So as we refine it and we say, okay, these are out, these are out, these are out for a variety of reasons, we might find that there's a very simple, obvious solution that would make everybody happy, or maybe not. But I think it's too early in the game to come
That's
to
the
that.
reason why it's a 50-acre lot, because it's 50 acres of wetland.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Or maybe it's a 50-acre lot because it's been in the family for years, and it used to be a farm, and there's no reason it couldn't be a farm again. We don't know that till we look at the piece.
My concern though is if it's a handful of people, isn't there a way of going to the board and asking, I mean, like, I know Pam quite well, by the way, let me just preface this and tell you, I know her well. And she's an exemplary manager of husbandry and her animals, exemplary. And not everybody's like her. You know,
That's
I've been involved in agriculture for quite a while, and it can get pretty darn messy, and I've seen messy. And I've seen it around, you know, in outlying towns too. So what I'm trying to say though is just to save us a lot of heartburn. Is there any way, like if I were Pam, yeah, can I go to some board and ask them, or the planning board, make an appeal there, you know, instead of grouping everybody and making all these changes? Is there an access to that for people to do?
I think that's kind of what we're talking about. This rural overlay zone is exactly that. It's actually a performance-based zone, where the zone would exist where the conditions exist.
Okay.
I think that's one of the things that I like about the rural overlay is that you would set a number of conditions that this particular zone can be enacted, no different than we do with the seasonal cottages or with the, basically, what is now the Kate's Butter Zone, but we call it the agronomic demonstration
Agricultural
facility.
demonstration and education.
Education
facility. Yes,
facility, yes,
the lack of an acronym.
right.
And
And that's,
That's a permitted use.
It's a permitted.
It's a
conditional.
it's a conditional use.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the
And-
zone, actually, it's not a zone, but that's effectively what we're doing. I mean,
And that kind
we
of.
would have this float between districts, it wouldn't be just limited to R4 like the agriculture is, or the seasonal cottages is limited right now to the BI district.
Right.
Completely contrary to everything else in the BI.
But today, the ones that are in the rural zones that have large parcels,
The R4.
and I'm gonna use this as an example, they can't do farming, like they couldn't have a huge garden open for
No,
the public.
yes, they can. The big issue is animal husbandry.
Absolutely.
Okay, so they can have organic gardening and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the animal.
It's
the
the
animal
animal,
things.
the animal units. If you look
They
at.
can do animal unit, actually R4 is wide open, you can do anything in the R4. So the animal units,
I'm
that's
not
not where the
talking about
restriction
R4.
is, it's
Well,
R2
you said
and R1.
R4.
Oh, sorry, I meant R1.
On the R1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the difference is in animal husbandry, if you look at the chart from last time,
It's more than 5 animals.
yellow.
More than 5 animals.
One and two, you can only have less than 5 animal units or less. 3 and 4, you can have more than 5 animal units, and an animal unit is 1,000 pounds, I am correct on that, right?
Yeah.
So it's, 5 cows and 50,000 chickens.
Right,
So,
didn't think that.
and,
50 acres and 5 cows is not a lot.
No, it isn't.
and I mean, another
Well,
thing.
no, 50 acres in the R1, you're right, is not a lot. 50 acres in the R4, you can have an unlimited number.
Another thing that makes a difference there, if we go back to the species discussion, which I think is an interesting thing to look at, is I can have a 10 acre farm and a barn and have 250 breeding rabbits, and nobody's ever going to know that.
And you did.
And yeah, but that's how I know I can do it. So if it's a species that's raised indoors, then, I mean, you still have a manure disposal issue, but, I mean, yes, I can tell you how much manure they produce and how small a space you need to compost it. You know, it's not a big deal. So, again, there's potential there for people who want to do things.
Right. That's a low-impact animal.
Ooh, is that a technical term? Or
No, I just made it up.
All right, I like that, low impact
I mean,
animal.
that's, yeah, low impact animal, I mean, that's.
Okay, let's not run that too far.
If someone on the planning board, and I want you to list all those.
I know.
I know.
You got
Is that the
it.
Low
official
impact, high
town-approved
impact.
list of low impact animals?
We can do that. We have the technology.
I know you can. Okay, and we're,
True.
yes, and gonna edit that.
We have one farm in Maine that has one or two now.
All right. Is there anything else we'd like to play with? Leaving this issue aside, because this is going to come up again in R2 and R3. Is there anything else we want to play with in the R1 description, or are we pretty happy? We're thinking about getting rid of the word good. Does that still seem like a reasonable description for R1?
Did we want to put in something about basically the conditional on the species of the animal? For animal husbandry?
All right, well, I made a note of that, so I can play with that for next time. We'll get some language together.
Okay.
But we can do it now if you want.
Do you want to pursue this rural overlay district though? I mean, as a floating district, I mean, I think it's got some legs, it's got some potential.
Can we get through the language for R2 and R3, and then, because that's going to apply to all three of those.
Yeah, that's
So-
what I'm saying. If we pull this agricultural issue out and put it into a floating zone in areas where agriculture is limited in some fashion, like the R1 especially, then we can probably zip through R1, R2, and R3 pretty quickly.
And then put it as its own separate.
Yeah,
Okay,
floating
Let's-
zone
let's
like a mobile
try
home
that.
park. Yeah.
see where it leads us. Okay, R2. District is located along Limerick and New Roads between the two R1 residential districts, as well as on the east side of Route 1 along Lock Haven and Old Post Road, CMAP. It's intended to accommodate maybe some good quality, moderate density neighborhoods with uses similar to those in R1. Residential uses are allowed at a density of 1 dwelling unit per 2 acres, so we've doubled the acreage here. And the rest of this is basically the same language as for R1. Higher density is possible, up to 1 unit per acre, for residential projects that preserve open space or participate in a transfer and development rights program and conform to established design standards as long as groundwater quality is protected, or if public/community water supply or sewage disposal is utilized. Lot sizes, lot frontages, and front setback requirements would be reduced to allow a more compact neighborhood to be developed as long as the neighborhood design standards, again set by the planning board, and all environmental standards are met. And because it referred back to R1 with regards to uses, there was no discussion of non-residential uses. Just go back to the previous paragraph, the last bullet under R1, because it would be the same language. So, for all practical purposes, the only difference here is that it's moderate density, 2-acre zoning as opposed to 1.
The only real difference between those two is one allows farm retail and the other one doesn't.
And museums, yeah.
And nursing home also.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think that farm retail is going to be one of the issues. If you do the overlay district, I mean, one of the things you're going to want to do is allow people to have a farm retail if they meet certain standards. So I wonder if the farm retail is going to be shoved into that at some point. It's gonna be absorbed into such a district if we were to do that. What the farm retail is, just out of reminder, most people here know, but if you don't, we always have had a provision that allows farm stands. So anybody can sell the produce, whether you've got a 50 by 50 garden in your backyard and you want to sell some extra squash, or if you've got 50 acres. The problem is, if you've got 50 acres, there's not a lot of room in a 200 square foot farm stand, because that's the maximum for a farm stand. Plus, since one of the objectives has always been to try to encourage homegrown agriculture and to encourage continued growth in specialty agriculture in the town, people need to be able to get their wares to the people. And one of the ways we were doing is by allowing them to actually set up a retail store on their property, and where they can sell their goods, plus some. First one that we have that's really operational right now is Finkel Pod Farm. That started off as a community agricultural area, in which basically it's agriculture by contract, and you came and pick up your produce on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, however the arrangement you had with Noah. And but he wanted the opportunity to sell additional produce and products that they produce to the general public if they wanted to. And it makes sense, and this is quite frankly what Pam Drew wants to do. She wants to sell, some llama material. So we actually did, in fact, put in farm retail, in which we allow people to put up a store, an actual permanent store on their property, in which they're selling primarily the products they produce, but they can also include other products they don't produce on there. But it's got to be less than, it can't be a majority of products from China or something like that. It's got to be your product, and then you can also have accessory products to that.
It's stated as secondary and seasonal uses. That's what it states in definition.
Yeah. Yep. Well, the product decides what you produce.
Right.
So you can you can sell Christmas trees.
Yeah.
You can sell jams, pies, things like that are secondary. But it does require you to have the primary use to be what you produce. One of the problems we had with Pam, for instance, was that because Pam's in a co-op, and when she shears her animals, she takes the wool to a co-op and they ship it off to a mill. So what she gets back, she has no idea if it was hers. And that was the problem. And that's what the planning board spent. How much time did we spend on that? We struggled with that quite a long time. And we still don't have a complete solution for it. But we do have farm retail. So it's a retail store in a residential neighborhood selling farm materials. And if you've ever seen, any of you have ever been to Gillespie's or Maxwell's, it's like that. It's modeled after those two kind of places.
It's not allowed in R1 though.
It's not allowed
It's
in
allowed in
R1.
R2, 3, 4.
So if you have a 50-acre parcel in R1, you can't
Can't
sell
do it.
the yarn off
Right.
of your
Correct.
property.
That's why I said this might
Yeah.
fold over into the agricultural overlay district to allow you to do that.
And that might make sense, because it would automatically pull that farm retail out of, say, an R2 property that was really too small to accommodate it or produce a crop, or enough product to justify the farm retail. So it would focus it on the larger parcels which are actually producing sufficient product to justify the store.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Because, well, there's an economic aspect to this, because of course putting up such a store as a capital improvement, it costs quite a bit of money, so you're not going to do it unless you're going to get some sort of return on it. That's not necessarily true, but usually people won't do it unless they're going to anticipate doing enough product.
But that would
It will
be
be
an
returned.
additional
Traffic, yes.
revenue
Oh, sorry.
for the town if they have, even if it's a small commercial, that's,
I can't tax a stand, but we
No.
can tax a retail store.
Excuse me, say that
You
again.
can't
How are
tax a
they-
farm stand, but you can tax somebody who's running a farm retail store.
Right.
Well, you can, to a certain extent. Well, a farm stand is no different than tacking on the fee that I get for my chicken coop. They have that taxed. I They do, you have a shed, they tax the shed as an outbuilding.
If you-
They tax the chicken coop as an outbuilding, so if you add a small retail as a farm stand,
I almost bought some chickens, I didn't know I had to go get a
you have
special
to get a
permit for a
permit, you
chicken
have to
coop.
get a chicken coop.
You have to
You
get a
have to
building
have a
permit.
permit.
You have to get a building permit.
You do?
I didn't build it, I bought it.
Remember that? It's a structure.
Put it on wheels.
It's still a structure. It's gotta be registered as a motor vehicle. You dodge it that way.
No, but then you get, personal property tax.
Not to mention
It's
the income
government.
tax on the registered chickens.
Don't worry, we're gonna get you one way or another.
That's right. But you'd much rather have a permanent building, obviously. You're talking about a permanent building than somebody's putting in electricity, and making some improvements in order for it to really fly. And that means they're making a commitment to their product, and to their business, and to the town, so,
A lot of
So-
now are expanding to year round too.
yeah.
I mean, I read this huge article, and this kind of pertains, I was reading this huge article, it was saying how the larger farms, the number of larger farms are going down. But the number of smaller, especially organic, co-op, and even the ones that are open now year-round, so they have certain vegetables that they grow year-round, are growing in numbers.
Yep, intensive farming. Thank you, Backyards Farms. They're the ones who really started off, and everybody's doing it. It's an up-and-coming trend. And it's going to continue as long as, we have bad weather out west in the Central Valley, and we have climbing fuel prices and gas
E.
prices.
coli and stuff that come
And all that other stuff
overseas.
that goes along. Exactly. So there's gonna be more and more of a demand for a local product. So there's an opportunity here.
So the overlay district that you talked about, I think that has some merit, but, and again, I hate to keep adding regulation, but the conditions have got to be such that, people don't sit back and say, oh, yeah, here we go, we go, more, but enough that you're protecting the neighbors,
So why do we need an overlay district? Why can't we simply say, in these districts, we're gonna allow those uses, conditionally allow those uses, which gets it in front of the planning board, which gets your neighbors there, if they wanna be heard about the impact on their property, they have an opportunity to be there and voice their objection or support.
Only because I didn't wanna write it for every district. Those standards. But,
But if you're gonna write an overlay district, that's gonna get more complicated. I mean, I was thinking about this is done in such a district too. I mean, I can see huge problems with this.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, just take some of Donna's examples, I mean, because most of what your examples focused on was somebody voluntarily reducing their lot size. What if they're involuntarily reduced? Eminent domain, adverse possession, partition, a variety of ways in which mistaken a deed. And all of a sudden, what you have permitted now, under Donna's examples, is lost. And it's not like I did it myself.
Yep, that's a good point.
but that could happen even if I have a use table and you've got an existing use.
Right, that would make, how do you change that if it's instead of an overlay district, it's,
If under the use tables, you've got a lot, I don't care if, in a specific zone, whatever that lot is, that's established, you're not gonna be able to do anything about that, that's there, right? But when we start messing with, I've got here a 10-acre lot, which allows me in this overlay zone to do X, Y, and Z, which I wouldn't be allowed because I'm in an R1 zone, and all of a sudden something happens that reduces that to now 9 acres.
But it would be the same thing in the use table. If I made it a conditional use that you wanted a agricultural, animal husbandry over X number of units, then, and it's gonna require 10 acres or 15 acres, depending on the species or whatever, and you change that, you're gonna carve off a lot for Bobby.
Oh, no, I didn't, I'm talking about involuntary.
Involuntary.
Town comes by and takes the road frontage. State comes by and takes. My neighbor says, hey, I've been occupying your property, 3 acres of your property for 20 years.
Wow, it's gonna cost them a bundle of mint.
And if you sold it to somebody else who wanted to buy the particular operation that's on that property, I don't want to think about it. Well, I do, I'd like to have the case.
You don't have to think about it, but
Oh, that was a good one. That was a good one.
I'm just saying, I mean, I just started thinking about this. There are, I think
I
there's,
think it's pitfalls both ways.
it's,
I mean,
but it's, I think it's easier,
covered
if I gotta
all-
come in front of the planning board, okay? Demonstrate what I have for acreage, or, come
Yeah,
up with a
but you do that
survey.
with the overlay district.
But I
You have to do that with
agree-
the overlay
it-
district because it's not, we're not gonna map it. It's gonna be where the condition exists.
But
The
in a way,
condition is gonna be like 10 acres or more, or whatever the number
Right.
is. That's the condition.
Right,
And
but
if
that would be
that's
the
impacted-
condition also of the overlay district. So if you change your land, you're no longer in the overlay district either.
right, but if, like, say, my lot is like 9.9 acres right now, more or less,
Right.
plus or minus.
You don't get a farm stand.
And, yeah, so in other words, if it's conditional in, like, I'm in R4, so that, but say this was an R1 district, if I'm conditional and I come up and they say, well, I can meet all the standards and I'm gonna, my farm stand, or is gonna be low impact, it's.
But
gonna be
one of the standards will probably be that you have to have 10 acres or more. If you don't have 10 acres or more, then you can't have it. So, you gotta meet all of these standards, and one of the standards, whether it's an overlay district or whether we allow it in conditions, you gotta or in standards, you gotta kind of state what those are. Right? So, if you don't
What I'm
have
saying
10
too, though,
acres,
is
you can't have.
if something happens to the lot, I've gone through the process, I've had a conditional use hearing, okay, I've met all the standards.
Yeah.
My neighbors have had the opportunity to be heard. Okay, and everybody's talking about that as being an important component here, balancing the abutters' rights against what I want to do with my property. So they've had the opportunity to be heard. They can see how this is going to operate, no matter what the size, literally, at that point. So if something were to happen untoward, that you lost an acre or something like that, so I don't have the 10, I don't see that impacting the conditional use permit. Involuntary, I say you can't convey it out yourself.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying, I just don't know, you either have 10 acres or you don't.
Yeah.
And
You
if
can
if
find out later you don't.
Oops,
That's right.
then you don't qualify.
if there should be an earthquake and the Arundel is the epicenter and the Kennebunk River shifts.
Well, I certainly
And the
hope
river
that happens. The
shifts
first
over.
thing that falls into the crevasse is a land use ordinance.
I'm just saying, I think it's easy to talk about zones, allowing those types of agricultural uses that you want, with standards, reasonable standards, conditional use permits, those types of things, and then go down to the table here, if you want to make some other adjustments as to what's permitted in the R1 zone. It's just
But you're
simple.
saying that regardless of the acreage.
Right. I don't want to worry about acreage. We're coming before the planning board on a conditional use basis. If the lot's too small, they're going to say,
You gotta have a
You can't
standard
go-
roll by, Tom, you know that. You gotta have a standard, you gotta have a rule.
you
Rule.
can, I think you can formulate standards.
Wow, I don't know.
And I wouldn't want to be the planning board member who says to Simone Walsh, you got 9.9 acres there. We're really looking for 11.2. Sorry. No.
Well, I don't think you can just say no, you gotta say why not. That's the way it works.
Yeah, I like that standards to hang my hat on. It makes it much easier when guys like you come at me in court.
I'm not trying to get it, it's really.
It's not
But I just think it's gonna get too complicated, and I just started thinking about it. Things are gonna be in and out. Somebody's already established a business there based upon they're having 10 acres, they find out they're not, now the business is gone. That's gonna generate a lot of problems.
But wouldn't that happen, Tom, whether you have an overlay business, an overlay district?
Not if I'm worried, not if I don't have to worry about acreage necessarily. I have other
Okay,
standards in
right,
place.
okay. That I understand.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. So your focus is really the acreage issue.
Right.
Okay.
But because that's what we're talking about, you're trying to get people who have larger lots, more permitted uses essentially, or conditionally permitted uses.
So you're, in either case, you're gonna get, surrounding landowners involved, but your thought process is, so what, if it's a 7-acre lot, and all
And
the
you can
neighbors around are like,
demonstrate.
yeah, that's a great, good deal, everybody's all 100% on board, and they meet all the other standards that would also be in an overlay district, that's acceptable, rather than look at it
I
as
just want to get an opportunity for people to get hurt, that's all. Once they've had an opportunity to be heard,
Yeah.
and decisions been made, they can appeal it, all that sort of good stuff, if they choose to do that, but.
Because you don't have, you don't have a lot of control. I don't wanna sell my land on 111 either, but they're gonna come take it by eminent domain in front of it anyway. So it's, you
I just throw it out
sometimes,
there. I
you
mean, I'm not-
sometimes don't
No.
get a say. You know, if they wanna widen the road, they're gonna come take it, and if all you've got is 10 acres, and you could have just 10 acres.
Yeah.
And if they come and widen the road and take it by eminent domain, which you really don't have any control over, then, you know, he's right. And
But that's
That's
such
kind
an
of-
infrequent event. really
it
is.
doesn't matter though, that one time that it happens, it's
ZBA.
bad for your neighbors, it's bad for the town, and it's,
Yeah.
and then you still put everybody in a position where that 1/4 of an acre wouldn't make any difference to the business, but because now they're under 10.
But I don't think this town, if you had an established business on 10 acres of
Right,
land,
you established.
and, you know, the DOT comes over and says, sorry Diane, I'm gonna widen the road and now you're down to 9 acres, I don't think this town's gonna say, sorry Diane, we gotta shut you down. That's not gonna happen.
But
You don't live in a non-conforming
say
confiscate-
hypothetically, that's what the rule says, is you're supposed to have 10 acres. And somebody sells the house next door to him and decides he doesn't like it. And he comes into town and says, your ordinance says he's supposed to have 10 acres and he doesn't have it.
Yeah, but-
Well, you could be grandfathered by saying that he originally did have 10 acres, but then this.
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
I've got lots right now that had eminent domain for rebuilding parts of roads here, a log cabin road, that are now non-conforming lots. We're not making them take the houses
We
off.
can't shut them down.
However, by what she's saying, what Tom's saying is, if I had a business and I sell it to you now and it's less than 10 acres, something.
You can't sell it.
You might not
No,
be
you
able to
can't.
sell it.
No, you could,
You could,
sure.
as a, when it's under 10 acres?
I don't know if I
I
If it
don't
was
know.
self-imposed.
As
if
a
you did it-
buyer, I
if you
don't
did
know
it
if I'd
yourself,
buy it.
if it was a self-inflicted wound, that's one thing.
I'm not talking about self-inflicted.
Okay,
That's
but-
right.
I'm talking about involuntary
And I
act.
think involuntary is something, that would be a situation of non-conforming use, which would affect you maybe from a business loan standpoint.
I created the non-conforming use.
But but you said it was involuntary.
I could have been involuntary because I didn't know it. In other words, if somebody sold me a piece of property, they didn't know, which, believe it or not, folks, happens. And I use that, okay? And then some heir from Alaska comes back and say, wait a minute, this is my ground, not yours, proves it in court, now I got 5 acres.
I know someone bought land from a family member, thought they had 11 acres and ended up.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Right on top of your piece is 3 acres more or less, have a survey done, it comes back in acres and 3/4. Thanks, It is I'm saying it's, this
I know
acre is
what
in
you're
trouble.
saying, yeah, there's always pitfalls in any of it.
Yes, I agree.
All right, so we've identified the problem, all we have to do is come up with a solution. That's
That's
easy.
what ZBA is for. I like that. They don't have enough to do.
Reasonable return, how in the world can you satisfy that? You still got a reasonable return.
It's an involuntary action. It's an action you didn't.
Doesn't matter, you still have a reasonable return. You
Not
gotta
if
get over
they
that
took your,
standard.
not if they took not if the
Still got
building
the
was
land
on
used for
there,
something
not if your
else.
building was on the parcel that was taken.
Still got the land you can use for something else. You can't meet those standards, you know that.
Sure you can. I ain't even been.
Go ahead, you'll make lots of money off it.
Hey, I got you, tell them it's ZBA, that's all I gotta say.
Anyway, I just
While we
raised
It's
think
a
it.
good
about
idea.
this,
It's a good
between now and the next meeting, in the interest of finishing this one page, was there anything anybody wanted to suggest as a change for R2?
Just out of curiosity, does R3 and 4 say the same thing, good quality, good quality?
R3 does, I didn't do anything with R4 because we're not there, it's not a residential zone. Okay, R3,
The non-residential use, though, it's going to be the same.
yeah, that's the same paragraph, yeah, it doesn't see the point in repeating that. R3 was when they stopped having things to write. They didn't bother telling us where it was located, so I suggested, maybe we should.
The district is located wherever we want it to be.
The R3 is anywhere, R1, R2, R4 do not exist.
Okay, it's in the DB1.
Yeah, pretty much. Anyway, we should probably have some vague, east of Route 1 would do it, I guess, but I didn't want to,
Do we need an R3 district?
well, that's a good question, and I was going to get to that
Okay,
last.
so sorry, I jumped.
That-
We
that's
should talk
quite all
about
right.
that when we go to R4, but I think R3 and R4 should be combined.
But they're two different, one's 2 acre, one's 3
One's
acre.
3.
No, 3 acre.
R3 is 2
3 and 4,
acre.
3 and 4.
R3 is 2 and
R4
R4
is
is 3.
So you change it.
Okay,
And we can't change it.
this district is intended to
Change it.
accommodate, let's get rid of good again. This time it's low-density neighborhoods that help, new phrase here, help preserve the rural character of the area. Allowed uses include residential home businesses and occupations, agriculture and other natural resource uses. Uses that generate traffic noise or similar impacts will not be permitted. Residential uses are allowed at a density of 1 dwelling unit per 2 acres, so it's identical to R2 in that respect. The only difference is this limits it to single-family and duplex residences. Multifamily units are not allowed. And this is also a little difference. All subdivisions of 5 or more lots are required to be conservation subdivisions in which 50% or more of the developable land is set aside as permanent open space. New lots fronting on arterial and collector streets will be limited, and if allowed, oversized lot frontage will be required. And then Tom's question is one that occurred to me as well. Do we need R3 at all, or should it just be rolled into R2? Or maybe R4? I don't know.
Or combinations thereof.
Maybe sections need to go in different directions.
It's really the, when you really look at it, it's the east side of Goff's Mill Brook, and it's also it's along Old Post Road on the west side. Well, actually, it's not along Old Post Road, it's basically along the railroad tracks. That's what defines it. So the northern part is defined mainly by the railroad tracks, and the southern part is defined mainly by Goff's Mill Brook. So the area, as you can see, we've got a lot of density. Basically, we've got a lot of we've got more smaller lot density. It's more developed than even sections of the R2.
There's a couple of areas where you might be inclined to put it in R2, but there's a couple of areas where you might want to ask them if they wanted to be in R3 or R2 or R4.
Well, they wanted the intent they have is to preserve more land, or to make it more conservation oriented, probably because of Goff's Mill corner. Well, I don't want this. I want the other one.
Because a lot of the R3, that's already chopped up.
It's very chopped up.
The only part that's not,
Oh, I thought the road is in R2.
like, this part's still a little bit big, and this part's still a little bit big, but all the rest of it's all chopped up. Not a lot.
So really what we should do is just look at the difference in the uses.
Yep.
Because, I mean, they're both 2 acre lots. And I mean, there are a few different uses, but if we go through the uses and make the determination that, yeah, you know, this use should be allowed in R2, then why the hell do we really need 2 districts, 2 zones?
Right, and you've got a good portion of it right up by the R2. And then the rest of it's up by the business area. So I don't know why you're worried about preserving it instead of business area.
The other thing is that there are 6, again, based upon the maps I was looking at, 6 split lots in the northern part, and they're all split with the BI district.
Yeah. That's because the BI district was 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, yeah, but that,
We're
and
fixing
there's
that
only
with BI.
22 large lots in all of R3, except for those split ones. So it's not a huge number of large, and most of those large lots are the smaller large lots.
Yeah, 10 to 19.
So
Yeah.
does this board feel that, you know, when I look at animal husbandry, R3 more than 5 units or animal units are allowed, but in R2 they're not?
Well, that would be taken care of if we pursued the rural overlay.
Well,
or whatever we're going to call it.
Or whatever we're doing. Yeah.
Right.
Whatever it's gonna be called.
So that one I'd almost take off the table for the moment.
Right, so then the other one would be educational facility, public, private, or parochial school. It's a conditional in R2, but not allowed in R3.
The other thing is, it says
Why?
R3 for some reason,
And why?
you don't allow a multi-family, but you conditionally permit it in every other zone. What was the thinking there?
I don't know.
Uh,
You remember?
No, that was when I had the good sense not to be on this committee. That was during my rebellious hiatus.
Okay.
So, when we look at an educational facility, I mean, I don't see why we would not allow that as a conditional use in an R3.
Well,
Yeah.
remember the landing school when it went in? Wasn't there a lot of hubbub from the River Road community?
Is that an R4 or R3?
Doesn't matter, it's, what it is an educational institution in a residential district.
And it's not allowed in R4 either.
So, that was one of the reasons for the hubbub.
And then the other one was golf course, not allowed in R2. Conditional in R3.
Not feasible in R2. It's now.
True, but
No, there are a couple of places in
somebody was
R2.
rich enough and wanted to buy a whole bunch of lots.
Yes, if you wanted to assemble one.
Well, you
I
have
think
somebody in the
Not-
R1 zone that has, I think, a 70-acre lot down up by
Maybe
the
100
west.
acres.
Yeah, I mean, they could make a golf course
100
up there.
million.
And the 70 acres won't do it.
No?
No.
How many acres do you need for a golf?
Good one, you probably need 100 and a half.
Really?
Actually,
If you want to do a part 3, you can
Parts
do it,
keep- and
there's
nobody
plenty
wants
of
to
wells
do
that's on the
part
levee.
No.
Nobody
And
wants to
then
play
mineral
part-
extraction.
Executive court.
Mineral extraction is conditional in R3, but
And the reason why is because you've got sand deposits down in sections of the R3, down in here, which is White Brown's across the street originally, but you have some Adams soils here, not so much up here, but up down here, and that's why they put
We
it
heard
in.
some
Yeah,
rumors
yeah,
that
but-
Crowe wanted to extend that town quarter district,
Mm-hmm.
which would then consume portions of R3.
Yep.
That's true.
Well, actually, yeah, the Townhouse Corner District, it is consuming R3.
Right.
But again, if the land is not suitable for mineral extraction, just because it's allowed doesn't mean
That's
it's,
right.
it's not
Well,
gonna
let me ask
happen, right?
you.
The land is not
Well, R2 is R2 mineral extraction allowed?
conditional. Oh, wait a minute.
No.
No, it's not.
No.
Mineral
R2's got
extraction
all
is
the
not,
granite.
but it is in 3.
R2's got the granite, that's where the quarry was.
Right.
Well, you got a couple,
But, you know,
at least one pit in the R1 district,
Really? What am I
Campground
missing?
Road,
Where?
Campground Road.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Stands?
Stands?
this is the land use
Oh,
ordinance.
bad suggestion.
Yeah.
That's a close pit.
Yeah, this is the section 6.
Supposed to be.
Keep flipping, there's a table in section 6.
We're discussing that.
Yeah.
So then the next one is a nursing home. It's conditional in R2, but not allowed in R3.
That's foolish. Or the old lady's gonna go break into the house or something.
No, it's just the size of nursing homes and the traffic for the shifts, that's all.
And this one was already brought up, I think it was Tom or somebody, but the multifamily is allowed in R2, but not allowed in R3.
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense to me. Sawmill is allowed in R3, but not in R2.
Suppose we have sawmills in R3.
And then I think the last one is the solid waste agronomic utilization is allowed in R3, but not in R2.
Allow farms in hers.
Those are the only differences.
R3, what's R3 got for farms? Not much. That's all wetlands.
I mean, to me, these are very insurmountable, and I think there's good grounds to say, you know, we really don't need those two districts.
Do you want a sawmill in R2? That's the question.
Again, if the conditions are set up right,
Well-
you know, you,
And could
Well,
be-
wait a minute, come on.
Could-
You know, remember, a sawmill is an operation that is a permitted use with certain conditions.
Yeah.
And the conditions are gonna have to be, you know, what do you have for conditions?
the biggest thing with the sawmill is the noise,
Right.
right?
Yeah, it's noise and traffic. those logging trucks coming in, those logging trucks coming out.
But that's, you know, a small sawmill, that's fairly infrequent.
Right,
But there's always the potential for a large sawmill,
Yeah.
then your roads,
right?
road doesn't.
I guess, I mean, if you have the right property, I don't see anything in R3, really.
Are they allowed? What are they, where are
It's
they
allowed in R3.
We have one, we have
Or
one
R4.
I know of.
Where do we have one in R3?
Proctor Road.
Sawmill.
Who did,
Was it near the end of the?
Yeah,
Well, it goes to show how noisy they are.
Oh,
If I
Also-
get in times, I've never seen any
Oh,
sawmill.
yeah. Those neighborhoods is pretty noisy.
That's at the end of Parker Road, right?
No, it's at the
Well,
beginning.
Cold Creek State, he thinks
It's
everybody
right,
knows.
it's actually in the BI district,
Wow.
which is ironic, because it's allowed in the R3,
No.
but technically it's in the BI.
Well, and we don't need to worry about it.
Well, we're gonna pull it back.
That's
We're
right.
gonna
It's
pull
allowed
the
in-
BI back.
It's allowed in the BI.
It is allowed to be.
It is allowed in the BI. It's conditional.
All right, well-
Who else do I have?
Do we need?
I have one in
I
R3.
think
Do
we
we
should
need
try
to
to look
allow
at a
a
way
sawmill
of
anywhere
buying.
except R4? Or
Well,
could
we
we,
have them in R4.
that's my,
What do you mean
so we have them in
We have one in
R4
R4.
and no, either no place
And
else
more than one.
or,
Yeah, we have some.
since a sawmill, one of the phrases we have floating around in here is traditional rural activities or something like that.
Shooting out windows of cars, junk cars,
No, other traditional rural activities,
ATVing over your
The-
neighbor's
the-
property,
the-
Mailbox,
raising ones.
tipping cows.
Could the sawmill be tacked into this, and I'm gonna continue to use the phrase because I like it, rural overlay district? That in addition to increased animal husbandry, if you had the right circumstances and the conditions were set right, you had a large parcel, you could also have a sawmill. Right next to Dan's
But you
house.
also have conditions in
Start
R7.
including, if you start including sawmills in this overlay district, Donna, where do you draw the line? Why can't we now put other more industrial uses into the middle of a 50-acre lot where it's not going to bother the neighbors? Why does it have to be restricted to an agricultural overlay?
Well, it doesn't have to, but that was the whole point, was that it would be a rural overlay district. You know, and I'm not suggesting we have to include sawmills, I'm just throwing that out as an idea, it's obviously not a
Yeah,
popular view.
Oh, no, I've got nothing against it, I'm just raising the question. We're now going from an agricultural type use to a sawmill, which
But a
you
sawmill-
can say, well, yeah, somebody grew the trees, but it's getting a little more industrial.
Well,
Where are you gonna draw the line
well,
here?
personally, based on what we've discussed, I would draw the line right there.
Well, we've got
But in
no
the standards for
extraction
conditional
too.
use permit, in those standards, you have that there will be no noise, dust, odor, vibration, smoke generated by the use that will adversely affect neighboring properties. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items that the planning board goes through every time on any conditional use, and you go through all of these.
So basically, if a sawmill grows up in the forest and nobody hears it, does it exist?
Now, if I have my 60 acres and I buy my own sawmill,
Yeah.
and I use it to cut my own boards off my own property, there's nothing the town can do about that, is there?
No, you're just subject to timber harvesting rules, that's all.
Yeah, I mean,
If
you're
you
not-
do it as
not
a
a business.
commercial
so you
operation,
can
it's a
have-
different story.
I have to say, number one, you're not gonna find a lot of sawmill that are gonna pop up because you have to have a lot of volume in order to make the sawmill pay for itself. So you're gonna find people who do it for themselves, like Kimball and the one on Limerick Road. But I just don't envision, I don't envision big ones because you have to get there from here. Those
Not the big
logging.
ones, but I can tell you, I mean, I just happen to know because I was involved in it, but, you know, the guy who's pulling logs out of Rangeley Lake and other such places, that have been there 200, 300 years, and just did a mill for him to saw all those logs up and ship them to Connecticut and New York to put in floors. And outrageous prices.
Oh, it's getting big,
Outrageous prices.
humongous bucks for
Oh my
those
God, it's
boards.
unbelievable.
And how big of an operation is that?
It's a big, you know, between saw and the planers and all that type of stuff, I mean, it's, you know, there's 7 buildings, probably 7 or 8 buildings.
How
Stories.
much-
All of that is indoors.
All that's indoors.
So, I mean, you know, it's not like it's out in the middle of the field and
That's-
everybody's gonna hear it for miles around. So I would imagine the biggest issue there would be the truck traffic, doing, you know, deliveries and pickup.
That's probably, in that operation, that's the least, because you can only pull out 7 or 8 of those lots at a time.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, that's, it's more the milling, planing, and that type of stuff. But there's people out there, and he's not the only one pulling those lots out of the lakes up north. It's amazing.
I couldn't
Well,
remember.
so many-
I remember
so-
reading the article and what she was getting per board foot, and I'm like, oh my word.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and you can't get grain like that.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
That's the issue. That's why they do it. That's
Mhm.
why. But the point is that the potential is there for that kind of operation. And that's what you have to take into
Is that it?
consideration. And Dan knows that sometimes those very loosey-goosey things of saying, it will not create any
How big a
impact
lot's the
is
lot?
very tough to weigh. And you know, you always want to give your planning board as much ammo and cover as you can, because, you know, frankly speaking, they go through a lot of,
The board does struggle with those.
they do struggle with that. You know, specific, you know, as much as we hate it, being as specific as possible helps people guide them on their way. That's why we have yellow lines in our highways. It's the same thing with the planning board. If they have solid numbers or solid, distinct yes/no questions, binaries, 1, 0, you know. Actually,
I'd be more concerned about the mineral extraction.
that's not okay.
Is that a secret sign?
It just helps the planning board. And also, what it also does is it increases consistency, you know, between planning boards, you know, from one set of members to the next. The more specific we are, the better it is.
But at the
Make sure that you
same
get
time-
equal protection of the law.
But at the same time, you're trying to shrink the ordinance down, you said, so.
I'm not, that's secondary to me. Making it work is primary to me.
So the question about combining the two.
Yeah.
I'd like to, if it's feasible, we would certainly make,
I think it is.
I think so too. I mean, even if we
Let's ask
could,
the other
Just
three.
get rid of that piece of R4. Make that all R3.
no, we're trying to get rid of R3.
and put it into
But
probably
maybe R3 will logically be split between R2 and R4. So some of it goes one way and some of it goes another, which could solve some of these problems. However, considering the time, it's now after 9 o'clock, and we've been very good about being out on time. So if I may, I would like to make a suggestion that we all have lots to think about.
Nice plain words.
In terms of, you know, where to go from here, and, you know, the discussion we've had tonight has been good. We've got a lot of ideas on the table. So
So are you entertaining?
think about those things. Yes, our next meeting should be September 2nd, I believe. Because Labor Day is September 1st.
Yeah. First day of school.
Yeah. So if that's okay with everybody.
Now, are we
There's
doing
a
them?
possibility I might not be able to make it.
I don't think the planning board is ready for us yet.
No,
We have
you've got some lead time.
Okay, so, no, September 2nd.
I'll be here, but I'll be late for this
I'll entertain a motion if anybody's anxious to go home.
Before we vote, Donna, is one of the agendas for the next meeting going to be whether we recommend getting rid of one of those districts? Is that going to be one of the agenda items?
Well, I don't know that I would put that as a specific item, but, you know, continuation of our discussion of R1, R2, R3, and certainly looking at R3, yeah.
I mean, I think we ought to give it some good thought and come up with some decisions.
I think, based on tonight's discussion, we're reasonably happy with the parameters that are already R1, R2. So yes, the next one is what do we do with R3? And then go back to a discussion of this overlay zone and see what we want to do with that, if we want to do anything with it. Okay, so we'll that motion in a second, and Dan's now ready to leave. All those in favor? Thank you all again.
There's a problem.
Close them up. I still have the tools.
I got the other door.